Welcome to another episode of Read My Mind Radio. I'm Thomas Reed, your host and producer. Today, we're continuing with our ongoing look at audio description. Read My Mind Radio has several episodes exploring the topic. They range from consumer perspective discussions and opinions to profiles of those in the field. In fact, you can go back to when Read My Mind was solely a blog. I've been writing and thinking about this topic for a minute, yo. Today, we're bringing you a conversation with some audio description professionals through the lens of consumers as advocates. What can we learn from their process and experience about AD that can help improve our advocacy efforts? The answers and more are up next. Let's go. Read my mind. Read my mind.
My name is Eric Wickstrom. I am the Director of Audio Description for International Digital Center, otherwise known as IDC, based out of New York City. I run everything from initial order through the delivery of audio description projects.
Eric got his start in AD about 10 years ago while working at the USA Network. This was shortly after President Obama signed the 21st Century Telecommunications Accessibility Act, now known as the CVAA. This mandates that major broadcast companies, including some cable stations like USA, are required to provide a minimum number of described programming each quarter. Over time, this number increases with a goal of 100%.
And I stepped up at that point and kind of offered to help spearhead the charge, working with the heads of my department. We were able to figure it out pretty quickly and get started, start building the library and getting in compliance with the FCC. I did that for about 4 to 5 years. By the time I left, we had the biggest library on broadcast television in North America.
About 4 years ago, Eric left USA and began working for IDC.
We do everything from editorial stuff, color correction, quality control, media processing, conversions, audio mixing, we do subtitling, all sorts of localization. We have a full service dubbing department now that will do English to foreign language dubbing or the reverse. Pretty much A to Z, anything you need, we do.
I wanted to speak with Eric to learn a bit more about the process, specifically as it relates to us as consumers who are advocates. We start with identifying some barriers to audio description, which fall into 2 categories: quantity and quality. First, budgets.
It's a very, very small part. Depending on the size of the production, there are cable networks that spend $12 to $15 million an episode on productions, and I can tell you in those cases, like your AD budget would be a percentage of 1%. The cost of producing a good AD track, hiring the right people and getting it done the right way, your average AD track is going to cost less than like the crash service table does during a production of a TV show.
We're talking about a few $1,000s. Definitely not an amount to consider as a burden on the production of a television or film project. So let's not even call budget a challenge to AD.
I just genuinely believe a lot of people don't know what it is. My father and stepmother were asking me 3 weeks ago about what AD is, and I've been doing this for 10 years. If they don't know by now...
That's just parents. Truth is, it's much more than parents. I'm sure we've all encountered someone who has no idea about audio description. And like the good advocates we are, we explain it and probably encourage them to give it a try. The more awareness, the better. But really, we need those in positions of power to be aware. How is it that production companies aren't that aware of audio description at this point in 2020?
Yes, a lot of production companies are aware of it now. The bigger production companies, they work with the bigger networks, the ones that would be mandated based on ratings. But smaller production companies that have traditionally worked like for an HGTV or probably a history channel, stuff they're doing smaller programming, it wouldn't surprise me that a year or year and a half ago when they were finally mandated to provide it, where people looked at each other and said, what is this? It wouldn't shock me, because if you haven't been exposed to it, you wouldn't know about it.
It's true. Most major films are released with audio description. However, what about the older content that seems to remain undescribed?
Well, that's changing. I know that Paramount, I believe, did a big push a few years back for AD to get it included in a lot of the DVD releases. That backfilled a lot of content that hadn't been previously described.
Who watches on DVD anymore? We're streaming.
The problem with the streaming services, not all of them require AD. at least not for everything that they air.
The issue is licensing. Streaming companies pay movie studios and television networks fees for the right to run these films and shows.
They only have the rights for a year or two, and then it goes away.
So if streaming network X pays to add AD when it moves to streaming network Y,
that service would have to commission their own AD track. I think the answer there would be if every streaming service required AD across the board, then these companies that are selling the rights for these things would have to commission a track, and then the track would follow that piece of material from service to service.
There's different reasons for content not being described. As advocates, an understanding of these can help direct our energy. In general, when we find content has no description at all,
you'd want to reach out directly to the studio itself. As far as television programming goes, that would be a conversation for the network. If it became an issue about quality, it might be a conversation with the network, but then that conversation would have to trickle down probably to the production company that provided the show in the first place.
That push for quantity doesn't automatically lead to improved quality.
A lot of AD is mandated by the federal government, and a lot of networks look upon it as something they have to do as opposed to something they want to do. That's unfortunate, because I think that's where you lose a lot of opportunity for quality or conversations about the best way to do it.
As consumers, we want both quality and quantity.
It's like anything. If I gave you a big bowl of frostbitten ice cream, yeah, it's a bowl of ice cream, but a giant bowl of Ben & Jerry's or Haagen-Dazs, that's the difference. As more and more networks are pressured into providing the service, I'm hoping that they take a moment to say, hey, let's give them Ben & Jerry's to eat.
Shout out to Ben & Jerry's. Doing it right consists of 3 components: the script, narration, and the mix, on making sure you can comfortably hear both the film's dialogue and AD narration.
It's all about the writing, in my opinion. Without a great script, you're never going to create a great track of audio description. I don't care if you get a James Earl Jones or Morgan Freeman to come in and read the thing. If I were going to make like a pie chart, the scripting would be about 80 to 85%. That's how important the script is.
Breaking it down further, here are the ingredients for a good audio description script.
What are you doing? I'm writing.
It has to identify the right things. It has to, keep the character names right. It has to be consistent, not over-explain things that you don't need to write. He shoots the guy. Like if you hear a gunshot, we know what happened. That's a big failure with audio description, is the overwriting of scripts and the over-explaining of things.
Developing a staff of writers for Eric comes down to deciding whether or not to recruit or to train.
I have found over the years, and this is just my experience, goes back to my days coaching youth basketball 20 years ago. I coached older kids, and then I used to coach young kids, like 4th, 5th graders, who never picked up a basketball in their lives. And I so much preferred coaching those kids, because it's so much easier to teach somebody from the ground up than to break them out of bad habits they've already developed.
Eric has seen a lot of bad habits from writers with years of experience.
There's too much good enough is good enough. For us and our standards at IDC, no, we're not striving for good, we're striving for great.
The script is that important. So I spoke with head audio description writer at IDC, Liz Gutman. She first heard about audio description from a podcast. No, it wasn't this one. That would have made for a fantastic segue, Liz. The podcast is called 20,000 Hertz.
It's a great podcast. There was an interview with a woman named Colleen Connor, who runs a training retreat in North Carolina. She is blind. She has theater training. She's a performer and a creative person herself. She and this other woman, Jan Bulgaropoulos, who's been a describer for a number of years, run this training retreat. And I had never heard of audio description before. I didn't know what it was. And hearing Colleen talk about it, explain what it was and the purpose it served and what's good audio description and what's not good audio description, my mind was completely blown.
It wasn't just audio description that blew her mind open.
I'm a non-disabled, sighted white lady, and I had never really had to examine my own biases, my own assumptions, the way I move through the world, the way I perceive others to be moving through the world. I'd never really had to challenge that from a non-disabled point of view before that weekend. It was a profound experience.
That really does fall right in line with what we do on Read My Mind Radio. I mean, it's all about adjusting and examining our perceptions. Can you tell me what that was like?
Yeah, absolutely. At the risk of sounding like a total jerk, I was terrified. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what was okay to say or ask. Should I offer to help? Should I not? Is it okay to say blind? All this stuff that now seems very 101 to me. I was lucky to be amongst a group of really kind, open people who encouraged me to ask questions and were very open about answering them.
Ready for more, Liz completed the AD retreat and attended ACB's audio description project training. There, she was paired with a blind mentor.
Her name's Myra. She's great. I've gotten to go on Described museum tours with her. She took me to see a Described performance of Waiting for Godot. That was excellent. She's also taught me a lot about experiencing culture in different ways, and that helps me become a better describer, understanding what goes into theater description and what goes into museum and art description. All of those things inform each other, I think, in really important ways.
Soon after attending her trainings, Liz began freelancing with an audio description provider.
Not too long after that, I really lucked out and was referred by a guy who's now a friend who I met at ACB, who worked at this company, IDC, who was hiring a full-time writer, and went in and chatted with them, and as they say, the rest is history. I've been at IDC since August of 2018.
So you only been doing audio description for 2 years?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
I
Wow.
know, it's wild. I feel
Wow.
I have a lot of imposter syndrome to get over.
Oh,
You know?
man. Yeah, no, well, you're definitely not an imposter. Come on.
Thank you. At the risk of sounding big-headed, I do think I'm good at my job. I would not consider myself an expert by any means, but I am very curious, and I do love this work. I've sort of intensively over the past couple of years been reading and talking to people and watching stuff with audio description, kind of immersing myself as much as possible, which has just been so rewarding. And not just because, I love the work, but this community is unbelievable. Describers and consumers of audio description alike. I mean, I'm just like floored and grateful always to be doing this.
It's said it takes about 10,000 hours of practice to become an expert in any given field. But what about the related skills that come from prior experience? That has to account for something, right?
My first job out of college was watching TV and writing trivia questions about it that would then be linked to product placement. It was basically like gathering marketing information to then sell to advertisers. I'll just put it this way. For a really long time, I couldn't watch any TV or movies without noticing products. That brand of car, that brand of soda. Oh, he's wearing that t-shirt. I couldn't unsee it.
That attention to detail serves a purpose today. At a minor in creative writing in college, publishing a cookbook, writing for a well-known food blog, and running her own business for 10 years, Liz has a wealth of experience and knowledge to draw from. She wrote about chocolate, for goodness sake. I'm not sure how many ways you can describe delicious. That's quality AD, language that succinctly evokes an image. At IDC, writers are selected for a project based on their specialties or specific interests.
One guy just sort of tends to usually do a lot of the fantasy, action-y stuff. Someone else does a lot of reality stuff. Our department head will kind of weigh all those things between scheduling and who might be best suited to write it and assign it to the writer.
Just because there are specializations doesn't mean you're working alone.
What I love about working at IDC is that it's really collaborative and we all ask each other questions. We get the best of everybody. If you get stuck on a phrase or can't decide how to deal with a certain thing, you want to describe all of this stuff and you only have time for one thing to help prioritize. Or a lot of what we'll do is we'll just take a poll like, hey, do you guys know what this word means? And if more than half of us do, then we'll use it.
I'm wondering when instances of cultural competence come into play. and how that works through in the writer's room. So what does your writer's room look like and how does that play? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really important question, and one that we're constantly considering and making sure that we take into account. We've had conversations about the finer points of person in a wheelchair, person using a wheelchair, why the phrase wheelchair bound is not okay, all the finer points of describing someone who is different from you in any way.
Differences like race or skin tone. Yet, the AD guidelines specifically call for excluding race or color.
Unless it is crucial to understanding the plot. If so, then everyone's race, ethnicity needs to be called out and mentioned specifically. I do think that representation is super important, and I do think it's important to mention it just so that a blind Asian kid or a blind Black kid, so they can know, oh, cool, just in all the ways that representation matters, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's important for a blind white kid to know that too, to say, hey, these people are in this movie.
And to not make the assumption.
Absolutely.
If you say like, oh, a tall woman and a short woman and a Black woman, then you're making the assumption that everyone else is white, and white becomes the default.
As advocates believing in inclusion for one group, I hope that means inclusion for all. If so, we should absolutely promote diverse writer rooms. That diversity should include the widest range of identities, race, ethnicity, gender, disability, and LGBTQ+ representation. Audio description is all about providing access to information that isn't conveyed audibly. Sighted people have this access and process it individually. Some may choose to question the casting choices, and others may find it empowering. No matter how one chooses to use that information, blind people deserve that same level of access.
We also struggle with, as describers, having enough time to include any of this stuff. Sometimes you don't get to add any description to somebody before they're named, or even after they're named, if it's something really dialogue heavy.
This lack of time is extremely important. This has to be a part of our awareness conversation. It's not enough that networks and studios have to provide AD. We need them to understand the value and make it an equitable experience. Creating the space for AD in their project makes that possible. I've been ranting for years about making use of pre-show AD. Liz, who in addition to writing also narrates and directs AD sessions at IDC, agrees. It just makes sense. Especially in the fantasy genre, where the imagery is unlike anything people would be familiar with.
When a creator builds this entire world from scratch for the audience, and I only have the spaces in between the dialogue to describe it, I do my best, but there's no way I can do justice to the scope of it. So I'd love to have an extra 15 to 20 minutes to just talk about the world, each village and each type of character and all of that stuff, because it's so integral to really enjoying the series more fully.
That's the writing. And then from there, you talk about voicing.
Eric's referring to narration, the second of three components required in audio description.
When I say the writing is 85% of it, that's not to imply that the voicing is not important. The voicing is extremely important. You can certainly ruin a great AD track with a bad voice. We've seen it happen.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Finding the right voice for the track itself. We try to match the story to the VO talent if possible, but also just trying to make sure you get the right tone. Some places use a one-size-fits-all approach to voicing, where the same voice person will do a wide array of projects. Nothing wrong with that. That's just a creative decision, a creative approach. We try to really fine-tune every choice of voicing with the script. That's usually a conversation between me and the writers as they get into a project. Maybe halfway through, I'll have a conversation with that writer and say, hey, who do you think? That's the benefit of having a team that's been together for years now. They sometimes have an idea before I even do about like who's going to voice something. The last part of the process, which again very important, and something that gets generally overlooked is the mix.
As you hear it, pump up the volume.
A lot of times you hear AD tracks and you hear a really jarring shift in volume. That's because the company's feeding it through an automated program. It's a cost-cutting move. It doesn't save that much money. It really hurts the quality. I don't like it. We won't use it, period. The last part of our process is a full QC pass.
QC, or quality control. Checking the final production for all sorts of inaccuracies.
And this happens often because you're writing thousands of words. It's easy to type Bob instead of Mark. Bob enters the room. Bob leaves. Well, maybe that was Mark.
Additionally, there's checking the levels of the mix, listening for mouth clicks and pronunciations.
When that track leaves our facility, it's gone through quite a production line of work.
Would you employ blind folks for the quality control part of it?
That's something we've definitely discussed. We would. As far as like the quality of the mix, the overall experience of the AD, yes.
IDC already holds regular focus groups, bringing their writers together with AD consumers.
That's a very important part of, of what we do. We're not making unilateral decisions about what the blind community likes. All of our decisions are informed by the blind community.
Audio description advocacy needs to include creating opportunities for blind people in as many possible paid positions throughout the production process. By possible, I don't mean based on the current process. There are many ways to get something done.
COVID especially added another level of stress because everybody was scattered. We're used to writing as a team in a room together, like a regular writer's room, any television show. We sit there, we bounce ideas off each other. That's taken on in the form of like daily Zoom meetings. As far as the voiceover people goes, a lot of our VO people working in New York City, and we use a very diverse roster of people. I had to figure out how dozens of people were going to be able to record VO. A lot of them are already actors and voice actors. They had their own setups, but many of them didn't.
The pandemic demanded job accommodations and a new workflow, which can be beneficial to the disabled community.
One of the things we said this year at IDC we wanted to get some blind people involved directly with the narration of audio description tracks. The challenge of that was we didn't do a lot of remote recording. We weren't really set up for it.
Since this interview, IDC has made some progress on that goal. I reached out to Eric for an update.
I can tell you it's going very well. You could speak from personal experience. You were nice enough to be the first person to jump in with us and help develop some workflows. I was very happy with how the quality of the track turned out. The feedback we received through social media and through the clients at Netflix, they were very happy as well. We've already launched our second project on Netflix with a blind narrator. The third one's in the works. We've onboarded 2 other blind narrators, and I have 3 more on deck.
I'm excited for the opportunities this presents for all blind and disabled people interested in AD narration.
Kelly McDonald, who we used on the second project that just launched, Sam J's 3 in the Morning on Netflix, he's a radio host up in Canada. In fact, his co-host, Ramya, we just onboarded as well. They have a unique ability because they've done radio for so long, and I think, Thomas, you've said you have this ability as well from podcasting all these years, to be able to actually hear a track in their ear and repeat it in real time at the same pace, at the same inflection. Originally, we thought using blind narrators is going to be something that's going to be easy to do with reality shows like the one you worked on, Skin Decision, stand-up specials like the one Kelly worked on.
It's a matter of being vocal about our own abilities.
We're not the first studio using blind narrators. That's not accurate if people are thinking that. There's plenty of narrators out there that have been working for years doing narration and podcasting and radio broadcasting. So the talent is out there.
With that said, if you're interested and have the ability to record professional sounding audio, stay tuned and I'll let you know how to contact Eric.
We're putting our best foot forward as a company and trying to be inclusive and accessible, using as many talented people as we can. There's no excuse based on what we've discovered over the last few months. Every studio creating audio description should be using blind narrators to voice the material that they're putting out. And in addition to that, we've onboarded some blind people from the community to work in our QC process as well.
These conversations with Eric and Liz help shed light on the challenges to AD right now and in the future. Companies cutting costs by automating the mix and employing synthetic speech are underbidding for jobs. Multiple people in the business have said how this has directly impacted the fees other AD companies are able to charge. How soon before other companies are forced to cut corners in order to stay afloat? It's imperative that as consumers and advocates, we demand quality, not that cheap sort of accessibility that gets slapped on at the end in order to comply with a federal mandate.
That has to be the push of the community to develop a universal standard. There's no approved vendor list per se, like universally. Everybody's kind of just left on their own. It doesn't take much more effort to do it right.
AD, unfortunately, is viewed as an expense and not one that generates revenue.
And that's wrong. There's 6 to 8 million visually impaired people in America, the last estimate. Every year, as people live longer, that number goes up. Those 6 to 8 million people are part of families. Families are using audio description so everybody in the household can enjoy watching television together. Especially now, during this time, that track, it's made for 6 to 8 million people, but it's impacting tens of millions of more people.
Remember, the AD budget is a few $1,000s. Your annual streaming network subscription will set a family back over $150.
If that encourages a family of 4 to subscribe to your streaming service or subscribe to your channel or pay extra for cable, it's more than paying for itself. You really don't have to draw that many families to break even, and then to turn a profit is just a few more.
Making sure AD is done right inevitably comes down to the blind community.
If you hear a track that we did on a streaming service and you like what we did or you didn't like what we do, reach out, let us know, and I'm always open to feedback.
Feedback should be a gift, so make it constructive.
Don't just say, hey, you suck. Well, thanks. That doesn't really help. We're trying to provide a service. We love this. We want to make sure we're doing it right. And I always say, if I just want positive feedback, I'll just ask my mother.
Do you have a project that would be a lot better with audio description? Are you interested in getting involved with AD as a narrator and have the ability to produce a high-quality recording? Do you have some comments on a specific project with IDC-produced AD? Reach out.
I'm always happy to talk about AD. It's a passion for us. It doesn't have to just be business inquiries. Anything you have to say, feedback otherwise, you can find us at idcdigital.com. You can search for audio description, fill out the form, and it will get to me.
You can also get to both Eric and Liz on Twitter. Eric's at IDC_Eric, and Liz is at Liz_IDC. I hope this episode contributes to moving the conversation around audio description advocacy to be more about good and bad audio description, the ways it can be improved, and the inclusion of more blind people at every point in the workflow. We know why AD is important to us as consumers. It goes beyond watching movies, television, and theater. It's relationships that come from these shared experiences. It's opportunities for conversation, education, entertainment, imagination building, and more. What about the perspective of those producing AD? When you speak about it, you are very passionate about audio description. Why?
That's a really good question. Audio description provides that framework I find challenging in a really stimulating way. It provides a service that creates meaning for me. I go to work every day and I get to write, think hard about the best way, the most vivid and concise way to convey something that's on screen so that someone who's listening to it will get the same feeling that I have watching it, and to help bring us all into the same level, especially since I have become more familiar with the disabled and blind low vision community. I have friends in that community now. I care about their experience.
Eric expressed a very similar sentiment and noted that he really appreciates the feedback from the community. He shares his wish about AD in the future.
I look forward to the day where I don't get as much appreciation because it just becomes the norm. I look forward to the day where blind consumers become pretty complacent about it. Oh yeah, it's got AD, great. It shouldn't be something special, and quality shouldn't be something that's special.
A big shout out to Eric Wickstrom, Liz Gutman, and the entire audio description team over at IDC. It's official. You are all part of the Read My Mind Radio family. Eric was a really kind coach. After submitting my first draft, he shared his comments.
You suck.
That really isn't helpful. You know this isn't the last you'll hear on this topic. In fact, I have some more coming up soon, so stay tuned. In order to do that, may I suggest you subscribe wherever you get podcasts. Remember, transcripts and more are over at readmymind.com. And yes, that's R to the E-I-D.
D, and that's me in the place to be.
Like my last name.